My name is Dan Kahn. At the moment, I'm the chair of the chemistry department here at Harvard. And I want to say welcome. And I want to thank all of you for coming to this symposium to honor Yoshito Kishi, his life and his work. My job is to be brief, which is, for me, impossible. But we have a full lineup, and we're starting a little bit late, so I'll just make a couple of very brief comments. One is just to say that there's just a slight change in the schedule of events. We've added a bathroom break. Those of us who are over 65 know why that's important. Right after Scott Miller's talk, and then right after Professor Fukuyama's talk, we're going to have Eric Jacobson read a memorial minute. At Harvard, there is a tradition when a faculty member passes, a committee in the department of the faculty member is established. In the chemistry department, the committee that was formed to write a memorial minute for Yoshi was Stuart Schreiber was the chair of that committee, and Eric Jacobson and E.J. Corey served on the committee, and Eric will read the memorial minute. It's a somber tradition, but it's important. And then we will also have a video presentation, which I think is quite nice. And then we'll go out and have cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. We'll do a toast at the end of that and have dinner. And I'm supposed to say to everyone that your seating, the table that you will be seated at should be on the backside of your tag. So we're hoping that as one speaker finishes, the next speaker we won't do lengthy introductions. In fact, we won't do introductions, except I am going to introduce our first speaker, Stuart Schreiber. All of you know him, and I think all of you, or many of you, know that Stuart had a very, very special relationship with Yoshi. You may know that Stuart started his graduate career in R.B. Woodward's lab, but when Woodward died in the middle of his PhD, Yoshi became Stuart's thesis supervisor. And Yoshi said to me once that Stuart was as close to a son as he has had. So we're very fortunate that he's going to lead off the symposium. They were very good friends. It's all yours.
Thank you, Dan. Determined to keep my composure, but that makes it a little more challenging. Very kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. To Yoshi's family, to the wide circle of admirers here today, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share some personal remembrances of Yoshi's life. I'd like to offer some small vignettes, little glimpses into a remarkable man, and I hope in the process these will resonate with you and maybe stir your own memories And I'm sure later, as we hear more from other presenters, maybe we can bring Yoshi vividly back to mind once again. I'm actually going to present in 5 parts. I want to tell you a little bit about how I met Yoshi, but then I want to tell you about Yoshi as a mentor, as a transformational figure in science, and as a departmental colleague, and then I'm going to finish with a concluding thought. So I first met Yoshi in January of 1977. I was a visiting graduate student at Harvard. It was just 3 years after his move to Harvard from Nagoya University. Just 3 years, and yet already he had had such a huge impact. To put the magnitude of my first encounter in context, I'd like to give you a little background. So when I came to Harvard in 77, I, like many, had studied the work of R.B. Woodward, who was Yoshi's postdoctoral mentor. And I was especially enamored with Woodward's idea about controlling stereochemistry in organic synthesis, controlling the 3-dimensional shape. And Woodward had conceived of intellectually brilliant and aesthetically appealing idea that molecules that are rigid rings will have a kind of inside where reagents will find it difficult to enter, and an outside where reagents will prefer to enter. So this was such a powerful idea. I, like many others, imagined that there could be no other way to control stereochemistry. There was an aura about Woodward at that stage, especially, at least, from a very impressionable and somewhat naive 21-year-old student of organic chemistry. Now, I had, of course, heard of the wunderkind, Yoshito Kishi, during this visit. I was aware that he was a master of organic synthesis, but I didn't know the details of his work, and more importantly, I didn't understand how he thought about science and chemistry. But when we spoke in that first visit, what he said, the ideas he shared, and the way of thinking hit me like a thunderbolt. When Yoshi stated that he could control stereochemistry on acyclic chains, not rigid molecules, floppy, rotating, acyclic chains. To be honest, I thought, I was in disbelief. I thought, if I'm really candid, and I probably shouldn't say this, this was so fantastical and so unlikely that I said, remember, as a 21-year-old impressionable and naive student, but I thought, oh my, Harvard recruited this guy. This just seemed, there was simply no way that this could work. So the next 5 minutes changed everything. Yoshi told me about his ideas, and what I had initially dismissed were revealed to be a profound new insight. And not only was it logical and powerful, it worked. He had actually accomplished this in the lab. So this encounter left me with a profound impact on, it had a profound impact on me, but it had a profound impact on how I was thinking about organic chemistry. I'll try to explain as I move on. But what was happening is I was witnessing the birth of a whole new field, what today we call acyclic stereocontrol. One that I think today is arguably more general and more powerful than the earlier Woodward concepts of stereochemical control. The key was Yoshi's deep understanding of conformation. That's the specific shapes of molecules that they adopt, and the subtle ways that conformational preferences could be exploited in stereo-controlled reactions. You know, I tried to allude to the idea that his initial statement about these acyclic chains, they're rotating rapidly, they're floppy, and it just seemed unreasonable that a reagent could ever find anything selective, a selective face to one of these chains. Well, it turns out they were anything but floppy. And Yoshi understood this and was able to exploit it in a very powerful way. Now today, when some of us, meet our incoming students and we start to teach them about organic chemistry and they learn about acyclic stereo control, it's so ingrained in the way we think that they don't often understand that it had some origins. In fact, I think they think, well, there could be no other way, much as I had thought years earlier. So this brief 5-minute first encounter changed my scientific identity. It revealed that my true love of organic chemistry was embedded in this understanding of the three-dimensional conformations of molecules. And this is a theme that has echoed throughout the following decades of my career, all from a 5-minute first encounter. So let me now share some thoughts about Yoshi as a mentor and an advisor. I did go through with my plan to work with Woodward, as Dan mentioned, but that path was unexpectedly disrupted a little after a year or so with Woodward's passing. I was floored that Yoshi stepped in to be my advisor. This was not something that I had anticipated. And I became determined to show my appreciation of him by soaking up everything I could, not wasting a single opportunity to learn from him. And this gave me an opportunity to know Yoshi not only as a scientist, but as a person. And I was in for many surprises. In my personal life, I had not had a positive male role model. Most of what I'd learned from life came from my loving mother. But I quickly realized that I could trust Yoshi, that he took a genuine interest in me, not just as a scientist, but as a whole person. To this day, I remain awed by my good fortune, and I'll always be grateful for Yoshi's warmth, his care, and the guidance he offered after Woodward's passing. Mentorship that I deeply needed at that point in time. Yoshi established a rhythm for our regular weekly meetings, and he informed me that we would meet at 11:30 p.m. on Friday evenings. That may sound unusual now, but honestly, to me, it was exhilarating. The idea that Yoshi would set aside this precious time just for me made me feel like I was the luckiest person in the world. No one had ever shown that kind of respect before, and it only deepened my resolve to prove myself worthy of his investment. So what was a typical Friday evening like? Let me share a couple of anecdotes because they were anything but typical. So first, Tohru Fukuyama. I think Tohru is here. Well, we're going to hear from Tohru shortly. He was a legendary figure among Kishi trainees. Legendary is a double-edged sword. We were inspired by him, but we also always had to hear about Tohru and setting the bar of excellence in the Kishi group. So as a background for my first story, I want to tell you just a little bit about organic chemistry. So we organic chemists, when we run reactions, chemical reactions, we analyze them with something that's called thin layer chromatography, or TLC. And we use this technique by preparing little jars with lids and mixtures of solvents that help separate the products of our reactions. So during one of our meetings, Yoshi asked me, "Stuart, what is the first thing you do when you come into the lab?" So I was a little puzzled about that, and so I tentatively replied, "Put on my lab coat?" And he said, "No." He said, when Tohru arrived in the lab, the first thing he would do is unloosen the lid of all 10 of his TLC jars so that he only had to do that once in the day. Now, it was a vivid lesson. I understood that what Yoshi was trying to do was to teach me how to become extremely efficient in time management. It was an unusual way of doing it, but and having 10 jars rather than the usual 2 was another statement. It was about not just about convenience, it was about thoroughness and being prepared for something unusual to happen. On another occasion, our meeting began with one of Yoshi's cryptic, signature cryptic questions. So this, again, going to need a little background. So it started, he said, "I surmise you spent the entire week working on bringing up starting materials." Now, let me explain what that means. So again, we synthetic chemists, we synthesize molecules, and as you make a new molecule, you do spectroscopic analysis and understand them deeply. But every once in a while, the molecules you're making, you run out of material, and so you need to perform these reactions on a larger scale and make more of it. Now, when you do that, you don't need to do the same level of spectroscopic analysis. You've already made them. You can do like this TLC comparison and just confirm. So then with his unmistakable Yoshi smile, he said, "I checked the departmental NMR logbook and I saw that you hadn't used the NMR all week. So I could think of no other explanation." Now, this was Yoshi's way of testing, probing whether I'd been working hard enough. As it happened, I had actually been bringing up starting materials, but the way he delivered his observation was classic Yoshi. Pointed, but playful. Okay, next. During one stretch of my training period, Yoshi became enamored with the word yuppie. Now, I asked Dan earlier whether everyone would know what that word means, and probably the age of this group on average. But in case you don't know, it's a term that was popular at a period, and I think it stands for young, upwardly mobile professor. Professional. But to Yoshi, being a yuppie meant having your priorities all wrong early in life. Chasing a high-powered job or a trendy lifestyle instead of something deeper and more meaningful. So I found myself on the receiving end of a steady stream of jabs. "Stuart, are you a yuppie? Do you want to be a yuppie? Oh, I think you are a yuppie." All delivered with his trademark mischievous grin. But as always, Yoshi was sending a message, and he was doing it in a way that was distinctly Kishi-esque. Playful on the surface, but packed with insight underneath. I'd like to offer a few other examples in this first section, but these are a little bit more serious. And the one I want to tell you about, I debated, but I'm going to share this with you. I hope you understand this story because I want to be honest with you and tell you, the person we all knew. So I had a difficult relationship with my father. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army. He was tall, strong, and deeply intimidating. But I kept my personal experiences to myself, never sharing them with anyone. At one point, my mother asked me if it would be okay if she and my father could meet Yoshi during a trip to Boston. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but Yoshi seemed genuinely happy to oblige. So I arranged a visit with Yoshi in his office. And that meeting did not go as I had expected. In fact, it was the only time I recall seeing Yoshi being uncharacteristically stern. During the conversation, he brought up the courage of Japanese soldiers during World War II, and he suggested that this was a quality that my father, perhaps, might not fully understand. Now, that exchange brought me a quiet, unexpected sense of satisfaction. I had never seen anyone stand up to Tom Schreiber like that before. I had learned early in life that there were consequences of doing so. I've reflected on this moment for many years. Did Yoshi somehow sense the tension between us? I'll never know, but in that moment, I felt like someone was standing up for me. It felt once again like a subtle but unmistakable Kishi-esque message. Next, during my third year of graduate school, I was invited to visit a university in Michigan. By the end of the visit, they offered me a faculty position, much to my surprise. And when I returned to Harvard, I shared the news with Yoshi. His response was swift. You would do better at Yale. He offered to help make a phone call to the then chair of the department, Samuel Danishevsky. Not long after, with Yoshi having played this key role, I received an offer from Yale, which I accepted, and that opportunity proved to be the prime catalyst for launching my independent career. It was a fantastic experience. And once this happened, we moved into a new phase of our relationship, and I saw a new element of Yoshi as a mentor. One where he began to prepare me intensively for life as an academic and life as a professor. Yoshi once told me that one of the keys of success in academia was a stable home life, especially an ideal marriage. He encouraged me to think carefully about the nature of a strong partnership, expressing concern that a spouse might become resentful of the long hours required of scientific research. I assured him that I was in very good shape in that, on that front, that I had met the love of my life, Mimi Packman. By the way, we just celebrated our 45th anniversary last week. Now intrigued, Yoshi asked a very specific but somewhat surprising question. What will Mimi do when you come home at 2 a.m. in the morning, having worked so hard that you had no time for lunch or for dinner? And I said, well, that's easy. She'll be up and ready to grab a bite with me. Oh, Yoshi said, delighted. That is very good. You're a very lucky man. Even in those early days, it was clear that when Yoshi spoke, he spoke from the heart. His words were never casual. They reflected a life lived with a deep purpose and true conviction. Beneath his extraordinary accomplishments as a scientist was a man who had found true fulfillment, not just through his contributions to chemistry, but through his unwavering devotion to those that he loved. For Yoshi, living a meaningful life meant striving for excellence in science, yes, but always with the family at the center of everything. His deep love and respect for Tokiko, his daughters Satoko and Hiromi, and sister Yasuko were unmistakable, even if expressed in that same gentle subtlety that marked his scientific insights. It was understood and deeply felt that they were his true foundation. As Yoshi aged, that love became even more radiant. The quiet pride he carried in his family now expanded with, I believe, his 5 grandchildren, some of whom are here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was evident in the way he spoke of them and the lightness that would come into his voice and expression when he did. To those of us fortunate enough to know him, his deep devotion was not just inspiring as his scientific legacy, but even more, perhaps even more inspiring overall. In Yoshi, we saw what it means to lead a life of integrity, passion, and balance, to pursue greatness without losing sight of what really matters, his family. Of the many pearls of wisdom that Yoshi shared with me, one stands out, and this happened to be one of the very first. Out of the blue, Yoshi said to me, "It takes 10 years to do something important, so choose your research topics wisely. You have 4 chances, maybe 5 in your career to do something significant. Do you understand me?" And I said, "Well, I think so." To which Yoshi replied, and I hope I'm not the only one who's heard this. It was the first time, but not the last, a phrase he would repeat many, many times to me, always after delivering a cryptic but profound insight. "Oh, I think you understand." And there were times when I'd say, "Yoshi, I swear to you, I do not understand." Now, 48 years later, I've learned that the wisdom offered by Yoshi is still relevant today. It takes time to accomplish something important, and each effort will have its own arc. And my image is to conjure a bend it like Beckham. So choose wisely, follow your intuition for what fascinates you, and could lead to a transformative advance in our knowledge. Yoshi said 10 years. In my personal experience, it's been 10 years plus or minus 3. Recently, I was invited by Chemical and Engineering News to speak to a group of recently selected talented 12 next-generation superstars. And I used the invitation to share a more detailed version of the little vignette that I've shared with you, this little version of Yoshi's Pearl of Wisdom. I said to them, while the specifics may differ for each of you, the core principle still applies. I told them, channel Yoshito Kishi and choose your problems wisely, carefully. You might not have unlimited opportunities. If Yoshi's right, you'll have 4 or 5, but you're not going to have 20 or 30. It takes 10 years to actually have an impact. So you have to choose wisely and devote all the time and energy to have an impact. But whatever path you choose, I said to them, please navigate with the Kishi principle in mind. I'd like to now transition to a few thoughts, and you're going to hear a lot more about this, as Yoshi is a transformative figure in science. Although Yoshi left Japan for Harvard, he made lasting contributions in his native country through his mentorship of multiple generations of Japanese scientists. We have Tohru here as an example, and there's, I'm sure, others. Before I return to some personal anecdotes, allow me then I want to just briefly talk about the really remarkable 50-year history and remarkable contributions to science that Yoshi made during his tenure as a Harvard faculty member. Yoshi was a crown jewel and guiding force of our department, in the Harvard Chemistry Department. He was a towering figure in the field of organic chemistry and synthetic organic chemistry, with transformative advances that were certainly comparable to that of R.B. Woodward and E.J. Corey in earlier generations. His pioneering work helped redefine the ambition and power of our field. Of course, everyone here knows that Yoshi himself would have quietly deflected this praise. His humility and modesty were essential parts of his magic. But the truth remains, Yoshi was one of the greatest synthetic organic chemists of his time, and indeed of any time. Among his many extraordinary achievements, perhaps the most iconic was the synthesis of the object of his affection on the left, named palytoxin, a very complex marine natural product. This remains the largest and most structurally complex organic molecule ever discovered and synthesized. Yoshi's lab was the first to synthesize it and remains to this day the only lab to synthesize it. And this synthesis was just way ahead of its time. It demonstrated a foundational truth: molecules of virtually any complexity can be made in the laboratory. The synthesis is now featured in every major organic chemistry textbook, and it's often referred to as the pinnacle of achievement, the Mount Everest of the field. Organic synthesis is, at its core about building molecules of interest, and in that domain, Yoshi had few peers. Beyond palytoxin, his lab accomplished the synthesis of many breathtaking molecules. I don't have them shown here, and I know that you're not all chemists in this room, but the chemists in this room will immediately know the significance of syntheses of monensin, tetrodotoxin, halicondrin B, and many, many others. But Yoshi's legacy extends way beyond molecule building. The field of synthesis also encompasses the invention of new reactions, the development of strategic concepts for constructing these intricate, complex architectures, and in the best cases, applications that benefit humanity. An ambitious chemist might hope to have significant impact in one, maybe two of these areas. Yoshi made transformative advances in every one of them. One particularly notable example was his discovery of a cooperative effect between two metals, chromium and nickel, and this was the basis of a very powerful carbon-carbon bond-forming reaction. This is called the Nozaki-Hiyama-Kishi reaction. It became foundational as a tool for many organic chemists. It's been widely used researchers around the world. Now, I personally find it difficult to single out one contribution of his many accomplishments, but if pressed, I would choose between two. The first I've already mentioned, the creation of the field of acyclic stereocontrol. But the second is his work on another marine natural product called halicondrin B. I don't have the structure of it here. It's a potent anti-cancer agent, and he synthesized this molecule, among others, using the methods of acyclic stereocontrol and the chromium-nickel reaction that he developed. But as with many of his synthetic targets, Yoshi didn't stop at the molecule's construction. He pursued its biological activity with great curiosity and insight. Here, together with his colleagues at the pharmaceutical company Eisai, he ultimately conceived and synthesized a substantially simpler, non-natural version of this molecule, halicondrin B, which the molecule I referred to is shown here, and it is today called eribulin. This compound was developed and commercialized by Eisai under the commercial name Halaven. Halaven received FDA approval for the treatment of metastatic breast cancer and remains to this day the most structurally complex, fully synthetic drug with a meaningful impact on human health. Its efficacy in Taxol-resistant cancers is especially noteworthy. The discovery and development of Halaven drew directly from Yoshi's profound skills and advances in organic synthesis, in particular, the ones I've highlighted, this chromium-nickel reaction and acyclic stereocontrol. Following the success of Halaven, Yoshi delivered a remarkable encore. Before I tell you about those encores, I'll explain this image, which I hope our guest Haruo Naito, the CEO of Eisai, and many of you here will recognize the name Naito in the chemistry building that we occupy. Yoshi developed a lifelong relationship with Haruo, and this is an image of a very special event that we all got to experience, and we still do. We cherish very much after spending an intensive 2 days in Tokyo discussing science and drug discovery with Eisai and Yoshito Kishi and Mr. Naito. Mr. Naito would take us to a very special restaurant. And we would, it was a great celebration with great food, a little bit of sake. You recognize the shoji screens of your favorite restaurant, Mr. Naito, and of course, karaoke. So following the success, Yoshi had an encore. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to show you. I had an artist friend do this little sketch. It is authentic, and I have the original here. And later tonight, I would like to share this art of Yoshi and his beautiful molecule, eribulin, with the Kishi family. So after eribulin, there was another remarkable advance. I think I have another slide. A molecule on the right. Now, this dealt with a very complex, we call it a lipopolysaccharide called lipid A. It's a critical component of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria, a very problematic bacteria, is the subject of great interest of two of our colleagues, including Dan Kahn and Andy Myers. Yoshi's and his team not only developed the chemical tools to synthesize lipid A, this very complicated molecule, but again, he and his colleagues at Eisai had a deep mechanistic understanding of its biological function. They discovered features of lipid A binding to its receptor. It's called the toll-like receptor 4. That is very important in the immune response to infection and sometimes the inappropriate immune response. And I remember very well when Yoshi was telling me about this project. It turns out this very complicated molecule binds this receptor and activates it. And I remember, again, this is like a deja vu, he told me that he had figured out how it was working, and he was going to change this compound into one that would bind the same receptor, but rather than activate it, it would inhibit it. And again, I thought, ooh, good luck. You know, of course, by now I knew not to underestimate Yoshi, but I just want you to understand, like, it was another one of those, that's not possible. That's not going to be doable. But of course, Yoshi and colleagues at Eisai synthesized this molecule, which we now call eriduran. thereby offering a novel approach to controlling excessive inflammation, excessive inflammatory response following infection. So this trajectory, from synthesis of complex natural products to understanding and elucidating their mechanism of action, to the creation of life-saving drugs, therapeutics, medicines, exemplifies the scope and vision of Yoshi's scientific program. And it had a profound effect on the field of organic synthesis and the next generation of synthetic organic chemists. Today, it's no longer considered sufficient to merely replicate a natural product in a laboratory. The new frontier, one that Yoshi helped define, lies in uncovering the foundational knowledge to create unprecedented molecules with powerful and specific therapeutic effects. I'm going to reveal my Harvard bias here, but I believe it's true. Our colleagues Andy Myers and Matthew Scher are among the very best at amplifying and advancing this aspect of Yoshi's legacy. Synthetic variants of natural products that revealed very novel mechanisms and imparted remarkable new medical impact. So overall, as a scientist, Yoshi taught us the importance of fearlessness, of charting one's own path, guided not by convention or external expectations, but by curiosity, intuition, and bold imagination. Now, a word about Yoshi as a departmental colleague. Yoshi was humble, soft-spoken, a leader in our department who inspired more by example than words. He was universally loved and deeply trusted. Known for his excellent judgment, his high integrity, his unshakable commitment to originality and scientific rigor, and his work ethic was legendary. In the life of an academic department, no issue is more important than the recruitment of new faculty. I first learned this very early from listening to Frank Westheimer. Later in life, in addition to Yoshi, Jim Anderson, who is here, was our chair. He passed the baton to me, and I remember very well telling me, look, the job is very simple. It's really one thing, and it is the next generation, the new faculty that we hire. This is in your hands, and you have to do the right thing. Yoshi would say to us, when we would consider a faculty appointment, is this someone who will see things that others will miss and who will pursue them no matter how improbable or difficult they seem? Yoshi's voice echoes in our minds, urging us to question the significance of our own research. And we take, and whether we have the courage to bring these problems to bear, to be successful, to stick with them. And we still hear his characteristic refrain delivered with a cryptic but illuminating remark afterwards, I think you know what I mean. The mystery, the mystique, it was all part of Yoshi's brilliance. He wanted you to reach deeper, to push harder, to understand more. That was his intent. For those of us who were his colleagues at Harvard, especially within our department, Yoshi remains the quiet voice in our head, questioning, guiding, and inspiring. Yoshi was well ahead of his time when it came to public-private academic industry partnerships. His approach is especially relevant today as universities such as Harvard are forced to reconsider their dependence on the government as a source of funding of the primary source of research that we do. And it was in the 1980s that Yoshi first forged this visionary partnership with Hiro Naito and Eisai. That collaboration helped establish Eisai in the United States and Andover, Massachusetts. And that unit that Yoshi led for a number of years in Andover had an outsized impact both on the company and society, developing new medicines that could not have been created anywhere else. Yoshi also teamed up with another giant of chemistry, his very good friend, and sadly, tragically, and heartbreakingly, we lost both Yoshi and his friend Chris Walsh within the same week. Chris and Yoshi teamed up to form what is called the Eisai Scientific Advisory Board, or we call it ESAB. And in addition to Mr. and Mrs. Naito today, we have a number of Eisai mates here with us. 16 years ago, Yoshi and Chris invited me to join the ESAB, helping me integrate into a company advisory relationship that was and still is truly unique. Yoshi's presence in that partnership was strong, decisive, deeply influential, and Eisai, for its part, was an ideal collaborator, bold, open to new ideas, and committed to pursuing ambitious strategies for developing medicines that could only emerge from such a distinctive alliance. Though the shoes of Yoshi and Chris left behind are enormous, I do my best to honor their legacy and to carry their torch today at Eisai. And I'm happy to say that, as an example, the Eisai team and I were able to get together for all of yesterday from 8 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. at night. And I like to think that if Yoshi's looking down on us today, he's happy to see what he started and carrying forward. Okay, I said I had a concluding thought. I've said many times that Yoshi taught us about the importance of fearlessness, the courage to pursue one's own unique path, no matter how unexpected or unconventional it may be, or it may seem to the broader scientific community. And for that, and more than that, he lived by this principle in every aspect of his life. There's a stanza in a poem by a poet that I am fond of, Robert Hunter. To me, it captures the essence of Yoshi and Yoshi's spirit. I'll read it for you. There is a road, no simple highway, between the dawn and the dark of night. And if you go, no one may follow. That path is for your steps alone. Yoshi was a father, a husband, a role model, a friend, and a towering presence in science. But to those of us gathered here, he was more than all of that. He was a singularity who blazed his own path. And I thank you.
Thanks, Stuart, for those really profound and remarkable statements. And I was going to start with some science, but there are a couple of stories that reflect on Professor Kishi's valuing family that I thought I would share. And a few months before I started my postdoc with Professor Kishi, my wife called his secretary to inquire about health care because we had 2 young children, and that was foremost in her mind. The next day, without any, I had no direct connection or involvement in this, but she called my wife back and said, your NIH stipend will be supplemented by a modest sum so that you'll be considered a Harvard faculty and eligible for Harvard Pilgrim Health. And so I think that really speaks to his thinking about the importance of family and the importance of balance in your life so that you can maximize your potential elsewhere. But if you don't take care of that, nothing else really matters. The other story that I was thinking about when you were talking about Harvard and Yale, at one point early in my time in the Kishi group, we met every Friday at to talk about halocondrin, and it was a regular thing, Friday morning at 11. And in one of those occasions, it was, well, today's the start of the college football season, and it was a Friday before the Harvard-Yale game, and Professor Kishi had a bag that he put in the closet, and he said, Juliet, when Satoko gets here, give her this for the game. And so he came back into his office, closed the door, we started our meeting, and I said, oh, she's going to New Haven. And he said, what? And he said, well, the game's at Yale this year. And he immediately went back out to his secretary's office and grabbed the bag and said, tell Satoko to come to talk to me when she gets here. So we were carrying on our meeting, and then she knocked on the door, and then with his usual sort of, he said, oh, Satoko, so I understand the game's in New Haven this year. How are you getting to the game? And she kind of rolled her eyes and said, oh, Daddy. And then she grabbed the bag and walked out. And I realized that, unlike our meetings and most of the things that I was familiar with involving Professor Kishi, he had little to no control over his over his daughter. So the thing that I was thinking about when I chose this title was there's a remarkable, I think, uniqueness to Professor Kishi's existence. If you think about people that develop new methodology, that's one group of scientists, and then you think about people that do total synthesis, that's another group of scientists, and then you think about people that discover new medicines. And I think at the intersection of those three groups of scientists, Professor Kishi stands alone as the only scientist I'm aware of that discovered a new methodology and then employed that methodology to discover, evaluate in the clinic, and commercially manufacture a drug. And of course, that's the NHK reaction and eribulin. But the first time I met Professor Kishi was when I was a grad student at Yale in the Sam Danishevsky's group, and it was in the mid-'80s. Professor Kishi came to give a talk about paleotoxin, and Sam introduced him and said, he remarked, there need be no debate. Yoshito Kishi is the greatest organic chemist of all time. And he, by saying there need be no debate, he kind of put that aside. But I remember Professor Kishi sort of sheepishly walked up and gave this spectacular lecture, but he started by saying, well, I don't know what to say. And but in that talk, it was mesmerizing because he started it by discussing a period of sort of despair that he went through in the aftermath of R.B. Woodward's passing, and how when Professor Hirata presented him with this problem, which was unsolved at that time and still being defined, that it sort of rejuvenated him. And so that notion that you can derive sort of life force by focusing on really interesting and challenging problems was something that I think Professor Kishi embodied throughout his career. And furthermore, I think when you really push the boundaries of organic chemistry, as he did, you create an environment where persistence, innovation, creativity all are fostered. So in that talk, he also alluded to the nickel-catalyzed chromium-mediated coupling, now we all know as the Nozaki-Hamakishi or NHK reaction. And that set the stage for, I think, for his involvement with halocondrins. So the halocondrins are a family of natural products that were discovered by the late Professor Uemura and Hirata and others in the Nagoya labs. And the structures are remarkable, as shown here. I think Stuart showed the structure of eribulin up here on the right, but helicondrin is over here, and it's a lot bigger than eribulin. You've got this sort of macrolide sector and all this stuff on the left. The first total synthesis of helicondrins were described from the Kishi labs in 1992, and they showcased the power of the NHK reaction to efficiently assemble structurally complex, multifunctional natural products. Even as this was going on, this total synthesis, Professor Kishi was engaged in discussions with Eisai and the Naito family about establishing a research site in Massachusetts that would focus on taking advantage of the structure and biology of natural products to discover new drugs. So the first project, and I wasn't here when that began, but the first project in the oncology field, or one of the first projects, was based on helicondrins. And now if you think back to the early 90s, the idea of using total synthesis as an enabling tool in drug discovery for a molecule that has over 30 stereogenic centers and over 120 chemical steps seems kind of outlandish. And perhaps that's still the case, but I think at that time particularly, there's no scientist that would have backed that, and there's no business person or company that would back that. So I think it was a unique combination of Professor Kishi and Mr. Naito that saw that project initiate, and the staff at ERI that pushed that through. So more recently, in the latter part of Professor Kishi's career, they did something even more remarkable. They decided to take essentially the entire stereochemical backbone and carbon backbone of helicondrins and turn that into a clinical candidate. So that was in the last 10 years. And if you look at, eribulin is basically a truncated form of helicondrins where you've gotten rid of this so-called bis-spiroketal, and you've replaced it with just this very simple tail. And the other difference is you've replaced the lactone with a macrocyclic ketone. So that's being evaluated in the clinic as we speak. And then more recently, building on the eribulin success, combining that as a payload, where you basically take this and attach it to a linker to an antibody. In this case, the antibody was farletuzumab, which was being developed by one of the Eisai family companies, Morphotek. So other companies are embracing eribulin as a payload and using that in antibody drug conjugates. So I think it's fair to say that Professor Kishi's impact on the field of the helicondrins and drug discovery in general has been pretty deep and profound based on simply this one example of the NHK reaction and helicondrin. So the secret weapon, of course, for the helicondrin project and the total synthesis, and as well as eribulin development, was the NHK reaction, the Nozaki-Hamakishi reaction. And that reaction was used no less than 3 times in the discovery of eribulin. So the total synthesis and the discovery of eribulin both used NHKs at C11, C12, C13, C14, and C26, C27. So these 3 CC bonds critical to the molecule's construction. The Eisai team took a somewhat unorthodox approach. They added a 4th NHK reaction at C19 to C20. Now, why did that strategy, why was that so important? This reaction had, again, in the late 90s, the NHK reaction had never been industrialized. And it was tough enough to replicate the NHK reaction, but at that time, there was also an asymmetric variant being developed in the Kishi labs, which used a solubilizing catalyst that was great because you got better stereo control, you got faster rates, but you also had everything in solution. So it was much more sensitive to air, moisture, all the things that you normally worry about. So the strategy of adding that fourth NHK reaction at C19, C20 was specifically because the team could not afford to fail late in the game. You'd lose years and maybe never get a drug into the clinic, let alone onto the market. So by adding that fourth one early to develop sort of earliest pilot plant POC, that was well, it turned out to be essential. Now unfortunately the CRO, well, our fears were confirmed because the CRO in Switzerland that attempted to industrialize this failed 3 times, I believe, and on pilot plant scale. And Professor Kishi himself went on one of our trips to discuss the tech transfer in Switzerland. But to make a long story short, we eventually took that reaction back to the Andover, the ERI pilot plant, to demonstrate the first successful industrialization of the NHK reaction. And I won't go into the details, but there are many factors that accounted for the failures in Switzerland and the success in Andover. But with that C19, C20 NHK demonstrated, we could go on to the much less forgiving C26, C27 couplings and macrocyclizations, and they all worked in fairly short order. In fact, the macrocyclization went from a milligram scale to half a kilo in the space of less than a month. So that was a pretty nerve-wracking month when that was being conducted. The successful realization of all those in the end of our pilot plant is noteworthy because I think from a historical perspective, this is the first industrialization of Professor Kishi's signature technology, and therefore the 100 Federal Street location should be, we should visit it at some point if you ever want to pay homage to the NHK reaction. So in the course of the discovery of the NHK reaction, one of the lessons that Professor Kishi taught was the importance of systematically identifying trace impurities in reaction phenomenon that you have observed. And in the case of the NHK discovery, I wasn't directly involved in that, but I imagine going through hundreds of lots of chromium to find a trace amount of nickel was a pretty heroic effort. And this similarly, when you're trying to understand and control reactions that need to be validated for a drug to be approved, you have to systematically isolate and identify trace impurities to set specifications, but more importantly, to understand what is making the reaction successful and what might be contributing to its not so successful outcome. In this case, there was an interesting trace impurity that was isolated and identified, and this trace impurity could be seen as arising from a Prinz reaction of this homoallynyl alcohol, which in turn could arise by elimination of triflic acid. And then acetaldehyde could form from the trace impurity from the solvents used to purify this. And if you underwent a Prinz reaction, you would arrive at this compound. Now, we reasoned that if this allylic carbonium ion could be intercepted, regio and stereoselectively reduced, you might have at hand a new way to make the halichondrin C14 to C35 fragment. So my colleague Hyung-Wook Choi investigated that further by treating the vinyl triflate with N-methylimidazole and heat, giving an inseparable mixture of the homoallynyl alcohol and this acetylene. Treating that with acetaldehyde gave rise to the expected byproduct impurity, but also this interesting other byproduct incorporating the acetylene that had added acetaldehyde to the C19 olefin. So different location, but essentially the same conjugation. And we reasoned that that might be obtained by an oxonium-ene from the same oxonium species that underwent the Prinz reaction. But now with the acetylene here, presumably the oxonium-ene pathway was more favorable to add this to the C19 olefin. So to investigate that further, we wanted to understand the role of stereochemistry, because this fragment, at least for the Prinz cyclization, has the epimeric C23 alcohol. So you need this fragment was going to become a leaving group in the NHK route, and so it needed to be inverted to investigate the Prinz. So on the next slide, Hyung-wook did a deuterium label experiment where he added sodium borodeuteride to the C23 ketone to give this mixture of C23 alcohol epimers. That was then eliminated with DBU to give the acetylene. And fortunately, the desired stereochemistry for the Prinz reaction did not undergo this oxonium-ene potentially competitive pathway. So that made it reasonable to pursue this as a route to C14 to C35. Another feature of the halochondrin synthesis, which was somewhat unexpected, at least in retrospect, was the occurrence of several unexpectedly crystalline compounds. So this C27 to C35 aldehyde with two TBS groups and an aldehyde doesn't appear to be the most likely crystalline compound, but yet you can crystallize this from heptane. Reconfiguring that to a substrate more suitable for Prinz cyclization was straightforward, replacing these TBS groups with paranoidobenzoates and the aldehyde with the dimethylacetal. On the other hand, the 14 to C26 fragment, after a Mitsunobu inversion and a palladium-catalyzed base-mediated elimination, provided the requisite stereochemistry and functionality to do the Prinz reaction. So the reaction worked fairly well. We were looking at a nucleophilic acetic acid derivative to capture the carbonium ion, and that occurred at the primary allylic carbonium ion. And the regio and stereoselective reduction of this allylic system was accomplished under plating catalysis with a hydride reducing agent, and then deprotection of the benzoates gave the C14 to C35 fragment. This compound was also found to be crystalline, and this was a somewhat serendipitous discovery, as the 2-kilogram batch was shipped to Japan in a heptane solution, and we got a frantic email from our colleague in Kashima saying there was a solid precipitate in the container. There's a problem here, and of course that turned out not to be a problem. But I was reminded of a conversation that I had with Professor Kishi about the relative merits of two different approaches to the C27 to C35 fragment. And I mentioned, well, the longer route has a lot of crystalline compounds, and the shorter one, not as many. And he said, well, Frank, eventually everything crystallizes. And, in Stuart's remarks, I think it could be seen as a criticism, but I thought it was almost like a galvanizing you to action, right? If everything can crystallize, then you have a much more optimistic and aggressive approach to defining crystals, because crystals actually are essential for practical organic synthesis, and it's something that's taken for granted in the small molecule world. But in the natural product space, people take it for granted they've got to do chromatography, and so why should that be, right? So I think that was an important lesson from Professor Kishi. So thinking about, I think the other thing that Professor Kishi emphasized just by example, not something he ever spoke about much, but it was really essential when you're doing complex molecule synthesis like paleotoxin or helicondrin to have powerful strategies to connect fragments. And certainly the NHK reaction embodies that in many ways. It's efficient, it's tolerant to a lot of functionality, and it's one of the more versatile reactions that I'm aware of for making CC bonds. So the Prince reaction was interesting because it made a fragment, but how useful could it be extended to, for example, macrocyclization? And that, on the surface, looked a little bit ridiculous because the well-known and well-documented acid instability of the helicondrins and eribulin. The idea outlined on this slide was to put an electron withdrawn group at this side of the ketone, C15, and by making this proton very acidic, it would essentially could protect C13 from getting activated towards making an enol, and the cascade reaction from there to the furans is hard to avoid. So that was the concept. In order to establish that, we needed the same sort of 27 to 35 fragment reconfigured as it was for the 14 to 35 synthesis, but we now needed two different fragments, this C1 to C14 fragment and a C15 to C26 fragment. The assembly of this molecule, well, we're not going to show you how to assemble the molecule, but this is the key reaction anyway. So this is the noteworthy reaction to focus on is that the Prince macrocyclization works in the presence of under the conditions essentially established during the 14 to 35 synthesis. So the entire carbon skeleton, presumably via this sort of transannular C26, C27 coupling, and then trapping of this allylocarbonium with methyl glycolate affords the desired compound. And then regio and stereoselective reduction of the allylic glycolate. Now that the sulfone has done its job protecting the polycyclic ketal and also connecting these fragments, it can uneventfully be removed, and then deprotection and removal of the benzoates. Incidentally, the penultimate compound, the eribulin diol, where the amine still needs to be inserted here, turned out to be crystalline as well. I'm not going to show this, but it also works in the helicondrin system. So the one thing I wanted to close on, the remarkable story about the E7130 synthesis that Professor Kishi did with the entire helicondrin molecule was incredible. But if you think back and imagine, eribulin was in the early 90s, helicondrin was in the last 10 years, what would happen if you had inverted those two projects? Could you have put a helicondrin, what's preventing us from putting natural products into the clinic right off the bat, right? So Professor Kishi's demonstration of the last 10 years showed that it's actually possible. You can put helicondrin to the clinic. Well, could that have been done 20 years earlier? And I think the perception, obviously helicondrin looks a lot more daunting in terms of the structural complexity. But if you notice, there's a repeating galactose unit that essentially accounts for all the stereochemistry in helicondrin. And it starts with galactol and proceeds out through here. And you can see some of the intermediates are identical to the ones you would need for the middle and the left. So the synthetic challenge is not as different as you might have assumed back then. The other thing is, even though eribulin's smaller, you've now by putting a carbon here instead of a lactone, you've made a requirement for establishing two new CC bonds in the most structurally and synthetically challenging part of the molecule, namely the macrocycle. So I would argue, and I think that if you do the math, it's correct, that they're basically similar in synthetic complexity. When you throw in the fact that helicondrin's an order of magnitude more potent, it actually might weigh in favor of helicondrins versus eribulin. But anyways, that's a thought experiment that we only can look at because of the benefit of Professor Kishi's and Eisai's remarkable achievements in the last 10 years. But maybe for the future, it's, the notion that natural products don't necessarily need to be simplified to advance and evaluate the biological concept as fast as possible in the clinic. I think that's something that Professor Kishi has exemplified in spades with this project, but also other projects as well. So this is the last slide, and Professor Kishi's legacy goes well beyond the natural product field of helicondrins. And here's just 4 examples that I selected from Eisai's clinical pipeline. The first compound, this hypothymycin analog, E6201, is actually the most expensive. This might surprise people. It's the most expensive small molecule that Eisai produces, because even though it's 10 times cheaper to make than eribulin on a per kilo basis, it's 100 times less potent. So so in terms of challenge, this is right up there. And again, the synthesis embodying the sort of message from Professor Kishi is get rid of the chromatographies, and you don't have to crystallize everything, but you can telescope things and whatever, and so that's a nice story. Now, helicondrin and hypothymycin E6201 are both in the oncology space, and that's an order of magnitude, I would say, or 2 less challenging than treating something, a global health problem like malaria. And I took this example from a collaboration between Eisai and the Broad. Hope you don't mind, Stuart, because this is not one of Professor Kishi's molecules, but I think it's inspired by some of the same thinking about how do you render a molecule with 5 stereogenic centers, all more or less made from scratch, to something really practical that can be produced on, and this is undergoing clinical evaluation. I think the challenges are still ahead, but I think it's well on its way. At least chemistry won't be the reason that it doesn't make it to the market, I don't think. Stuart also mentioned the lipid A analog iridiran. This is a compound that has the opposite activity. Maybe that was part of the message there. This is a TLR4 agonist, not an antagonist, and it replaces the disaccharide sector with this urea, and that's undergoing clinical evaluation as a vaccine adjuvant. I put it up here partly because of the challenge. This compound, I can't say it's chromatography free, but it's pretty close. All the intermediates are crystalline. And then finally, this macrocyclic bridge sting agonist, E7766. This is still a competitive area, and the natural product is a cyclic dinucleotide, also so-called CGMP. And Eisai, rather than trying to get rid of the macrocycle, actually added a macrocycle on top of it, which was this 4-carbon tether. And that confers additional potency, REF activity, so it's pangenotypic active, and it's quite a bit more stable. It actually is excreted completely intact upon administration. So I think I've selected a number of these compounds, and of course the helicondrins exemplify that because of their topological uniqueness and because of their stereochemical richness. I think it's fair to say that today macrocycles are much more in vogue at a lot of companies. Around the time of the eribulin approval by the FDA, I attended a meeting in Cambridge, and it was on it was a roundtable discussion about macrocycles in drug discovery, and a senior executive from a leading pharma company, I won't name it, said, you know, scientists in the pharmaceutical industry are like lemmings. We just need somebody to show that you can do a macrocycle by total synthesis and put it on the market, and then everybody will follow along. And I think it's fair to say that Professor Kishi has never been a follower, and he's always led by example.
Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here today. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Margaret Hsu, and I was a graduate student in the Kishi group between 1991 and 1997. We're here to celebrate Professor Kishi. We already heard so much about his chemistry. We all know he was a brilliant chemist, a legend in synthetic organic chemistry, so I'm not going to rehash all of that. Instead, I've decided to talk about my time as a graduate student in the group and how the Kishi group was like a family to me. Okay, so while I'll be talking about my memories as a graduate student, I invite all of the former students to, whether you were postdoc, graduate student, undergrads, to also join me and think back about your time at Harvard. I hope the stories I share will also bring back memories of your time, and I hope they're good memories, but that's for you to decide. Also, in the process of making these slides, I went through my box of very disorganized photo negatives. If I show your picture, I assume your consent is granted. I know we all have less hair and more wrinkles than we had many years ago, so I issue myself a get out of jail free card, just in case. So a few months ago, this Facebook cartoon appeared in my feed. I laughed when I saw it and shared it with my family. It's very true. We all plan to have a straightforward path to earn our degrees. But the reality is that we each face different challenges and obstacles along the way to the finish line. Maybe not the literal, disasters and predators, but it might have felt like it when that happened to you. So in the fall of 1991, I was among the G1 class of 42 students. 42. That was the largest G1 class we knew of, and over half of the students were interested in organic or bioorganic research. With 5 faculty members working in those areas, the process of joining a research group was a bit stressful because I did not have my own funding. On top of that, organic chemistry had very few female graduate students. Professor Corey had 1 female graduate student at that time, and Professor Kishi had none. Speaking for myself, I was intimidated by the whole situation to even ask Professor Kishi to join his group. I didn't want to be the only female graduate student in the group. So I was very happy Rebecca Marsh Roth was also interested in the Kishi group. So when the dust finally settled, 4 of us joined the group that year: Ken Boy, myself, Becca, and Ophir Moreno. So compared to what Professor Schreiber just shared about his graduate life, you would think that life in the 90s was easy. So we show up whenever Professor Kishi might be in the office. That meant 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Mondays through Fridays, 7 a.m. to late afternoons on Saturdays, and occasionally Sundays he would be there too. During golf seasons, our Saturday hours were shorter. The lab was my life. I don't remember when the Chinese food truck pulled up and parked down the Oxford Street. We would buy lunch from the food truck or from Harvard Square and we ate it in the conference room between 11 and 12 while Price is Right was on TV. Some people were more diligent and made lunch or brought their own lunch from home. Here's a quiz. Does anyone remember who made a cup of white rice with a can of tuna for less than $1 a day? The answer will be revealed later. I used to eat dinner with other students at Harvard Square or at Mather House, where I was a non-resident tutor, then return to lab to finish up for the day while waiting for Professor Kishi to leave. Many others brought in food and ate in the conference room as well. Now, unlike the 11:30 p.m. Friday meetings, our group meetings were Fridays at 4 o'clock. The presenters had to provide snacks, and there would always be a lot of chips and beer. While the presenters sat in the main table sweating bullets, the rest of us sat in the back, comfortable chairs, and with the alcohol and the warmth from the room, we would start to fall asleep in the back. You might remember that. Okay, so I cannot present at the Kishi Symposium without another ChemDraw slide. So thank you, Dan, for helping me find this reference. A few months after I joined the group, Professor Kishi put me on carbohydrate chemistry. My PhD work was on solution conformation of methylated polysaccharides. Anyway, one of my memories of carbohydrate chemistry is using a plastic bucket, the same kind of bucket we use to transport ice cubes for the roller vapes, and the same kinds I have at home for washing my car. So after the hydrolysis of the methyl tetrabenzyl glucopyranoside structure 2 to yield structure 3, the mixture was poured into water in the plastic bucket, and we left it in the hood over the weekend. Having gone on to work in the highly regulated pharmaceutical company, this non-GMP process step was very memorable to me. As I mentioned earlier, there were very few female graduate students in synthetic organic chemistry. Becca and I started together at the beginning of 1992, and we supported each other. Becca took over a lot of instrument maintenance for the group. She was patient and chill, but always excited to discuss chemistry. 2 years after we joined, Laura Cook-Blumberg, she came along and joined the group as well. So Laura and I became good friends. She eventually became one of my roommates when we lived down Oxford Street, and later on, one of my bridesmaids. Together, Becca, Laura, and I were the 3 female graduate students who earned our PhDs from Professor Kishi. This is the group from 1994 in the summer. You can, if you were here, you can find yourself in the picture. Okay, so if you were part of the group in the summer of 1994, you would remember that we had a mandatory 2-week-long vacation because the Kishi lab was under renovation. I went out to LA and visited some friends, including a stop at Pomona College, where Dan had just started his career. Mike Mandlich, he was working in Southern California as well, so he came and met with us. He's the rice and tuna eating person I mentioned before. I had an OSHA recordable event in February 1996. It was early one morning, and I put a flask on the high-vac rotovap with an acetone dry ice condenser. The acetone in there was left over from the previous day, so it was saturated with water, and the piece of dry ice I put in there caused the whole mixture to blow right back up, and it landed all over my left arm. It was wintertime, so I had on a long sleeve. I quickly pulled on my sleeve as it froze, but I still got burned. I had big blisters for many weeks. But it's been about 30 years now, and the scars are barely visible, so that's a good thing. I met my now husband, Roger Kwong, when he was a postdoc in the Jacobson Group. After he left Harvard, we held a long-distance relationship for almost 2 years. During that period of time, I would bake treats on weekends and send them to him. I also brought the extras to the lab. Professor Kishi discovered where I put those treats. He would often stop by to check on 303F late in the afternoon to get a snack. So besides trying recipes from Mrs. Field's cookie book, one of my go-tos is this Pillsbury fudgy bonbons. They're simply delicious because it's got melted chocolate in the middle and quick to make. But in their naked form, they look like something on the sidewalk you don't want to step on. Professor Kishi initially had a questionable look. He rubbed his chin in that signature chin-rubbing look and before deciding to take a bite. After that, he came back for more. As a graduate student, I succeeded Mike Kress as the party chairman for the group. We always had a party for Professor Kishi's birthday in April, a picnic in the summer, and a year-end party. We also had going-away lunches for students and postdocs as they departed the group. There were constantly something for me to plan. Every birthday and holiday, we would collect a few dollars from every student to chip in and buy him a gift. I think the default was a bottle of wine, but we also, I remember us getting a golf club, massage chair cover, basically whatever we found from the Sharper Image catalog. For his 59th birthday, Professor Kishi treated us to Lac Auber, a French restaurant in downtown Crossing. Unfortunately, the restaurant closed since. For us underpaid students and postdocs, it was such a treat. Look how nicely we all cleaned up, right? During COVID, during the lockdown period, I sent a stack of pictures to Professor Kishi. There were lots of pictures of group members at picnics looking out of place because we were not indoors wearing our lab coats and goggles. For the year-end party, it was either at the group conference room or at the Kishi home. The picture on the left, that's a massage chair cover that I spoke about. And on the right, you see Bruno and Kevin with Professor Kishi. And one of my favorite pictures is in the middle with Mrs. Kishi. The best kind of celebrations were the defense parties. We celebrated the great finish to graduate from the Kishi group with a PhD from Harvard and a great job ahead of us. By my count, I witnessed 10 of them before it was my time. So there you are, Ted. And Dave, I don't think Dave's here today. Here's a group in '97 before I left. Photo credit to Ted, who's pointing the clicker. And Matt, you see yourself there? Laura? Okay. We all remember Professor Kishi's sharp mind and his unique sense of humor. Some of his comments may not be HR-approved choice of words in today's environment, but it gives us a good laugh, right? I have a story to share. So the construction at the north end of connecting Mellencrop with the next building included the installation of a big elevator. From the parking lot, Professor Kishi would ride the elevator from the ground floor up to the third floor, then walk through the home group to the Kishi group. The elevator is big and slow, intended to move delicate instruments. One morning, I got into the elevator at the same time as Professor Kishi. The ride up to the third floor seemed to take forever. I wasn't sure if the elevator was moving or stuck. And you might remember, back in the 90s, we didn't have cell phones. So I would start to panic a little bit, looking for, is there a phone that I can use to call for help? I did not want to be trapped in the elevator with Professor Kishi. So in that awkward moment of silence, I noticed the sign, and I said to him, "Look, the elevator has a capacity for 5,000 pounds. We're safe." He looked at me and asked me, "How much do you weigh?" So I defended in August 1997 and started at Abbott Laboratories 2 months later. I joined the process chemistry group in the Chemical and Agricultural Products Division. The company valued me and my degree. Not only did I get to name my starting salary, over the coming years, they hired my husband, and we both had opportunities to grow. My relationship with Professor Kishi evolved after I left Harvard. He asked about my family, especially about my dad. He was surprised that I had to work the overnight shift in our pilot plant, and he encouraged me to find a position where I can achieve professional and personal balance. After 8 years in process chemistry, I moved on to program and project management, where I was able to find that balance. In 2006, Professor Kishi was finally ready to submit my PhD work, the carbohydrate project, to JOC. I had to come back one weekend to locate the NMR spectra from the attic and scan them. Back when the buildings were not locked during the day, I would always stop by and say hello whenever business travel brought me to Boston. I left Harvard exactly 28 years ago. Looking back at the years I spent in the Kishi group, my PhD journey was not full of natural disasters and flesh-eating predators. I'm grateful that Professor Kishi accepted me into his group, gave me the opportunity to make it through, and then set me up for a successful career. So I modified this cartoon slightly. Couldn't remove everything because there were challenges, but I put in some birds and flowers. Because as I look back, my PhD journey was also full of good times and company with my Kishi family. So I believe you're here today because you also have good memories from your time in the Kishi group or in your interactions with Professor Kishi. I would love to keep sharing stories and connect with you. While we will always be covalently bonded to Professor Kishi, he brought us here today to let us form new bonds with each other. Thank you.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Miller, and I was at Harvard from 1985 to 1994, initially as an undergraduate, and then as a graduate student in the lab of Professor David Evans. I'm going to talk about my experiences with Professor Kishi in much the same way the others have, but to get us started, some of the molecules that we've already heard about are going to figure anecdotally in some of the things I'd like to share. But to start, I found my lab report from Chem 35 and the syllabus from Chem 35 in 1987, when I first met Professor Kishi as a student in the class. And I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but I'm pretty sure that Professor Kishi himself showed me how to use a rotovap, because the syllabus for the course basically involved Professor Kishi giving a lecture, more or less, before every lab session, which would be multiple hours after the lecture. And my recollection is that he was a constant presence in the laboratory, looking at our setups, showing us the techniques that we needed to know. And it is possible that a TA may have showed me how to use a rotovap perhaps incorrectly, and Professor Kishi was correcting my technique. But to be honest, if the TA is in the room, I do apologize. My recollection is that Professor Kishi himself showed me how to use a rotovap. And so here's my final report from the semester, where I completed turned it in on May 14th, 1987, the synthesis of pseudoionone, which is this molecule here. The very first reaction that I ran as a 20 or 19 or 20-year-old student in Chem 35 was the addition of the acetylide anion to the ketone to give this product here. Now, in these days, and certainly in Professor Kishi's lab course, we did not buy a solution of sodium acetylide. We instead performed the reaction at age 19 as the very first reaction. Of course, we cut our sodium metal into the round bottom flask, and then we had a reaction that involved two gases, condensing ammonia and acetylene, 2 to 3 cold fingers feeding into the round bottom flask, and then eventually we would add the ketone dropwise and work it up. According to my lab report, I achieved, after vacuum distillation, almost 14 grams of the product, which represented 37% yield for the first step of the synthesis. And so that was my introduction to Professor Kishi and the laboratory. And as I mentioned, he was essentially, to my recollection, constantly a presence. So eventually I found my way to the Evans group, where one of my projects was the total synthesis of McBeeson here, which I show juxtaposed with paleotoxin to emphasize that it's approximately maybe 5% of the complexity. This was a period which followed, I'll come back to the synthesis in a minute. One of the things that became known to David Evans and the other Harvard faculty, I think, soon after I became a graduate student, is that in high school, I spent 2 years working as a dishwasher at the Ponderosa Steakhouse, where I spent a lot of time in that role learning how to repair these industrial strength Hobart dishwashers. And I don't mention this to be frivolous or so on, but this really was important because for me, I think Dave Evans thought this would be a very important piece of expertise because the mass spec facility at Harvard at the time was rather primitive. And in fact, I received the assignment as the departmental mass spec TA from Jonathan Ellman, my current colleague at Yale, and he was working primarily with an instrument that looked like this JO mass spectrometer, which was constantly in need of repair. And eventually, of course, the facility was improved and Dr. Andy Tyler came to Harvard. But the truth is that I think this was one of the very best jobs I ever had because being the departmental mass spec TA meant that I had after-hours access to the mass spec facility, which means, and I share this quite literally, that on at least a few occasions I would be working at my hood in the laboratory trying to make McBeeson, and I would feel a tap on my shoulder. And the tap on the shoulder on at least several occasions came from Professor Kishi, who had a vial, and he would say to me, Scott, this is a very important intermediate, and it would be very useful if we could learn the mass of this compound, and maybe you could move it up in the queue in the mass spec. And so I had at least several of those visits from Professor Kishi, at least one that I remember from Professor Corey. I do not believe that Stuart Schreiber ever directly provided a tap on the shoulder, but many of his students did. And in fact, in those after-hours access to the mass spectrometer, I had just this really exhilarating experience with many of the people in the room and individuals throughout the department having the first look at the molecular ions that were being generated in all the laboratories. And to me, this was just an incredible, incredible stroke of good luck, and which gave me, again, I think, an additional type of access to the members of the department, including the faculty. Now, a little bit about my own graduate work and my interactions with Professor Kishi. In McBeeson, we have this diene here, and we wanted to make this easy diene with a rather involved olefination reaction. And we were aware, of course, of many of the activities in the Kishi group, which included the synthesis of this double bond. And so this looked maybe a little bit Mickey Mouse relative to what was going on here, but it was hard and it wasn't working. And so I was encouraged to go talk to Professor Kishi. And so I did. I summoned my courage and made an appointment and went to talk to Professor Kishi about it. And Professor Kishi had two comments. The first comment was, Scott, it really should work. And from there, we went into a little bit more detail, and he said, Scott, this was eventually we used this phosphonate. We were initially working with phosphonium salts. He said, Scott, what you really should do is you should make sure that your phosphonium salt is very, very dry, and you should use an Abderholden to dry your phosphonium salt. And I was like, an Abderholden? I don't remember exactly what that is. And he said, well, you can check your Chem 35 lab manual. And so this turned out to be good advice, because in the end we were able to make McBeeson, and I was able to figure out how to use an Abderholden to dry my phosphonium salt. Now, at the end of this synthesis of McBeeson, I had just the great good fortune of being invited to the Kishi group to give a group meeting. And I went over there and presented the total synthesis of McBeeson to Professor Kishi and members of the Kishi group. And this was a synthesis which was at the time really hoping to illustrate the use of these asymmetric aldol reactions, what my colleague Seth Herjan likes to call methodology-driven synthesis. And so I presented the synthesis. It was, of course, a several-hour group meeting, numerous questions from members of the Kishi group. And at the end of the group meeting, I had Professor Kishi hadn't asked any questions yet. At the very end of the group meeting, it was Professor Kishi's turn to ask a question. He asked one question. He said, Scott, how would you make this molecule if you were not in the Evans group? And what I share with you today, I think for me at least, was very, very important. And I'm sort of shy to say so, but it is true. And very important lesson from Professor Kishi, because to be honest, I don't think I had thought about it that much. And that, of course, as part of my education, was just a tremendously valuable lesson to think broadly about science, not only about how the science and the group that I was in was contributing. So a little bit about Professor Kishi and his science and his embrace of complexity. I'll go through this quite quickly because many of these themes have come up several times already. We heard a bit already about the really emotional experience that Professor Kishi shared after the death of Professor Woodward. This is an excerpt from his essay on when he won the Tetrahedron Prize, Paleotoxin, an inexhaustible source of inspiration. And what he says early in this essay was exactly what we heard about earlier from Frank, as how really it was his visit to Professor Hirata who showed him the structure of paleotoxin, and Professor Kishi generously shared with the whole world in perpetuity in this essay. He says it was at that moment my mind was back to chemistry with full curiosity and excitement. And I just found this, as Frank said, just to be incredibly inspiring. So Professor Kishi, as we've heard, of course, really encouraged us to work on hard problems, not only of great significance, but also that looked, I think, almost impossible at the start. And I think that this is really something that I think is genuinely Kishi-esque. I think this indeed is something that we've all learned from Kishi. The details, this is excerpted from some of my teaching at Yale when I talk about synthetic chemistry. We've heard about the nature of the complexity of the syntheses that Professor Kishi and his group were able to complete. The aspect which maybe I'll just mention real briefly is really also how Professor Kishi was so pioneering and I would argue maybe still underappreciated in some ways for his development of the universal NMR database to tell us how to learn about structures from all spectroscopies, actually. Of course, NMR, of course, figured so prominently the synthesis of the fragments, the use of the Karplus curve, but not only the local structure, but also the overall dimensions. Professor Kishi was pioneering in the use of fluorescence to give us additional global information about what these molecules look like. And so this, too, of course, I believe is one of his legacies. Acyclic stereo control, just a towering achievement, changed the field. What I'll add, which maybe is perhaps of interest to everyone, in this essay, the thoughts about how Professor Kishi's thinking about acyclic stereo control are laid out in this essay. These first two references are reference 3. Ebright, Wilson, Dudley Hirschbach, and co-workers talking about conformational analysis from the standpoint of the physical chemistry, the theoretical chemistry that helped us to learn about how it is that we could have these well-defined acyclic systems that could lead to selective chemistry. And then, of course, at the heart of the NMR database is the thinking around the Karplus curve for coupling constants. And so this was another really important contribution, leading also to, of course, the work that Frank told us about with the halachondrins. And also, we heard a bit about the links of synthesis and structure to biological function, and a little bit about the C-glycoside project. This is, I'm going to just mention very briefly, this is my own research group right out of the gate. We first, just a couple years in, and this is Nicholas Papagiannou here, who was one of my initial PhD students, who went to postdoc for Professor Kishi. Some of you will remember him. And this is his paper with Professor Kishi, Product Regulation Mechanisms for Fatty Acid Biosynthesis and so on. Incredibly proud of that work. Tom Horstman, also one of my first students who went directly to ASI after his PhD. Now, if Professor Kishi were with us today, I think he would want me to say a little bit about the science in my own group, so I'll just say two very quick things about it, again, from an anecdotal perspective. One of the things we did in my group was try to develop small, low molecular weight catalysts, often conformationally rather flexible, for applications in an antioselective catalysis. So in a sense, inspired at least a little bit by the tetrodotoxin work and the densely functionalized stereochemical arrays, we were interested in breaking symmetry with the catalysts that we were developing in inositols and so on. And we did do this. And after this paper came out, I heard, at least initially indirectly, from my old roommate, Ted Hsu, that Professor Kishi would like me to give a lecture at ASI to come talk about it. And so this was very exciting to me. And then again, this was almost a quote, I imagine, Ted. Scott, we want you to visit, but Professor Kishi says only on a date when he is here. And so this was, of course, incredibly inspiring for me. And on that occasion, I had a fascinating and unforgettable interaction with Professor Kishi about how we might extrapolate from the small molecule chemistry we had been developing in some of our early papers to work that we might then do trying to take this type of asymmetric catalysis to the selective functionalization of very, very complex molecules. And I will share that I think this met, at least in part, Professor Kishi's criterion that, Scott, if many people think it's impossible, you should try to do it, because this certainly has been a project for which we have met that type of concern at the outset. But with Professor Kishi in mind, we've been able to make some progress. And he shared at the time his view that a lot of the control he felt would come from local conformational control, very much like contributed to the overall structures of molecules like paleotoxin. And so we continue to work on this, and this is the last piece of science I'll show with a lot of different molecules, a lot of different types of chemistry, trying to develop catalysts that are conceptually blue, red, or green to go to blue, red, or green substructures within these complex molecules. Now, I'm going to wrap up here with the following last little story. In 2009, I was invited to give a lecture in Nagoya, one of the fifth Yoshimasa Hirata Memorial Lecture. And I have to share that this invitation, I remember vividly thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to Nagoya. And I thought to myself, this must be what it feels like if you're a young musician and you get an invitation to perform at Carnegie Hall or sing in Vienna and so on. And I was just so excited about this, and I went off to Nagoya where I met Professor Daisuke Uemura, also another giant who of blessed memory. And I started to tell him how grateful I was to come. Thank you so much for inviting me. And Professor Uemura's first comment to me was, Scott, Professor Kishi told us to invite you. I've been back several times, and I have to say it remains a place where I feel so welcome and so at home. My acknowledgement slide is very, very brief, but hopefully meaningful. Of course, I and so many of us are so grateful to Professor Kishi for all the aspects that we've been talking about. This is my research group from just a few months ago. Ted Suh and Dan O'Leary gave me the pictures, and of course this is the Kishi group from a number of decades ago. And I'll just conclude with one statement, which is really the following. I think every day, maybe almost every day, I don't want to exaggerate, but just constantly, I just hope that I, as a faculty member, am able to give my students what Professor Kishi gave all of us. I mean, to me, that's really where I'd like to close. Thank you very much.
By listening to all the other speakers today, then it gave me a more stronger impression that I was with Dr. Kishi in the pre-philosophical era. Because he kept asking me, do this, do that, and I have no idea why. So then I learned chemistry by doing experiments, and then understand why Dr. Kishi asked me to do this. So that's completely different. So then you can easily see that what kind of life I went through in 1970s. Okay. Okay. When I was a senior high school student, that was the time that the industry, especially polymer industry, is up and coming. And so I read some booklet and then realized that, okay, well, this is really important field. So then I just wanted to apply for the school at Kyoto University as polymer chemistry. But then, for whatever reason, I came to the point that, well, is polymer chemistry that interesting? It's small molecule. How interesting it is that the small molecule to really polymerize to maybe 10,000 or 100,000 molecule weight. And so then, well, this may not be the one that I might be interested in. Oh, I forgot to mention that my name is Tohru Fukuyama, and and I'm the first PhD from Professor Kishi's group at Harvard. And so that's so this is that. Okay, then I wonder why this would be the field that I want to be. And so then my father was an artist, a painter, and I haven't inherited a bit of artistic talent. I'm good at just drawing the straight line. That's the reason why I have no problem just writing the structure of organic compounds. Okay? But this is Professor Munakata of Nagoya University, and he came to my house every week just to learn the arts, painting from my father. And so, but I think just that his another objective was to just drink sake after drawing. So then, so he was, already drunk. And then I started asking, what kind of, chemistry are you doing? And then he mentioned, well, the female moth, just really very bad against that rice, is excreting some organic compounds. And then the male moth is attracted from distance away. And whoa, wow, this chemistry is much more interesting than polymer chemistry. So I immediately decided just to work for him. So then I decided just to go to Nagoya University. But then Biggest turning point is that came when I was a junior student. I was doing the undergraduate experiments in the undergraduate laboratory. And then all of a sudden, I had never had a chance to talk with Dr. Kishi, but then he came to see me. And then he started talking about, well, if you were to join my group, your future will be rosy. Something like that, okay? So then he really promised that I could have a really good time in my future if I were to work for him. But my first impression is that I've never seen such an overconfident person. Because I tend to be a little bit overconfident myself, but he's way up, So, but then he really gave me the impression, wow, this person is really interesting. And so the reason why I came to Nagano University just to work for Professor Munakata. But then, Professor Kishi was, just working for him might be a little more interesting. So then, overnight, I just thought about it, and then decided just to work for Professor Kishi, and then went to the Professor Munakata's office. And then I knew him since I was the elementary school kid. But he said, well, Professor Kishi is young, but he's very good. So then you have to work very hard for him. He really encouraged me. And then this is a welcome party picture in the junior year. School starts in Japan in April. And so this is Professor Kishi, this is Professor Goto. Professor Kishi was, immediately after coming back from the Professor Woodward group, he became the associate professor. And so this is TA, myself. And then within a few days, Dr. Kishi told me, don't call me Kishi-sensei. Sensei means it's a teacher, or Professor Kishi, or Dr. Kishi. So he literally told me, that, don't call me Kishi-sensei. So then I have to call him Kishi-san. San is the one that to be used, the suffix for Japanese that just for the plain senior people. Okay, so I have to start using the Kishi-san. It's a little bit awkward for me to use that word, but then he insisted. So then I started using, just calling him Kishi-san. And what Dr. Kishi told me when I was an undergraduate student, since his desk is just two desks away from me, so I used him as a dictionary. So then I kept asking him a question. And one time, he really got upset and told me that, don't you ever ask me such an easy question. Now, in my heart, I will never ask you any question again. I thought it's a waste of time to just really just try to find a book just would answer my question. So that's the reason why I really ask him many questions. But anyway, so I decided not to ask him a question. That actually continued for a long time. Okay, then one day he told me, "Why don't you do this reaction?" And I know a similar reaction in literature, but it didn't give a good result. So I just showed him some literature that I knew. And then he got upset, How do you know the results without doing it by yourself? So even though it's almost the same reaction, then he really didn't want me to say that, okay, it doesn't work, unless I actually do it. And then he told me that it took 10 years before I became truly interested in organic chemistry. Okay? Then, in my heart, no wonder why I'm not very much interested in it yet. And Mrs. Kishi, okay, she prepares the lunch for Dr. Kishi every day. And very frequently, he carried one banana with him for his own, just use. But then he very often gave me that banana. Banana back then, is not really cheap, fruit. It's a little bit expensive, in Japan at that time. So I really want to say that I followed him because he was such a good chemist. But then I also tend to think that, well, he fed me with banana. So, well, that could be, just a remote reason why I showed my, just really fidelity or whatever, just to him. And then when I was an undergraduate, he put me in the project of tetrodotoxin, the potent neurotoxin. And yeah, he told me, do this, do that. And then I did what he told me to do. But then it took 70 minutes, okay, one way from the lab to my home. And so it's a waste of time to, really spending time for commuting. So then I slept in a sleeping bag like this, okay, in a, just an unused storage room. And so Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, okay, I slept slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. And after sleeping for 4 to 5 hours, washed my face in the lab, and then without eating breakfast, resumed the experiments. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I worked until 10:10 at night. The reason why is that the 10:40 is the last train to go to my home, okay, from Nagoya Station. So if I leave at 10:10, then I could catch the last train. I didn't want to spend 2 nights in a row in such a hell, okay? So I think just that, yeah, Stu might know, and also the Rob Armstrong knew very well that, just I used to be very efficient in doing experiments, very quick. But the reason why it became so quick is because I wanted to go home on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And then Dr. Kishi's working hours back then, 9 a.m. to 24, that's midnight. Okay? And he ate the lunch, but he skipped the dinner. So then Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, I got hungry near the dinner time. So then I cooked the ramen, instant ramen, okay? No. And pretty often, Dr. Kishi asked me to, cook it, for him. I didn't like it because, I have a very strong stomach. So I don't care what I eat, okay? Usually there's no problem. But then Dr. Kishi, well, he apparently has some sensitive stomach. So then if I don't wash that noodle, okay, just once cook it and then after that wash it very cleanly and then recook it. Otherwise, just he said, well, that would cause the diarrhea for him. So it's a kind of double trouble for me to cook ramen for him. Anyway, so Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, when I stay in the lab at midnight, before going home, he asked me to do this and that. And also, he never failed to say, don't push yourself too hard. But then, how many times did I see sunrise by doing what he asked me to do? Yeah, it's, doing what he asked me to do, usually it doesn't, it usually takes at least several hours or whatever. Then I gradually see that the sun coming, coming out. And, but still, that really didn't bother me that much. Fortunately, I had a pretty good tenacity or good health, whatever. So then it didn't kill me that easy. So, and this, just 2 slides just to show you what kind of stupid mistakes I made when I was, undergraduate. Okay, for the small-scale reaction, I wanted to convert this methyl group to aldehyde by using selenium dioxide in xylene. At 180 degrees, it's a pretty high temperature, higher than boiling point of xylene. And the next reaction is just to use sodium borohydride to reduce the aldehyde to alcohol. Small-scale reaction, there's no problem. Very clean reaction occurred. But then for the large-scale reaction, I use the sort of a bomb, a glass bomb to do that reaction. And then selenium, I shouldn't say metal, whatever. Selenium simply deposits the wall of that bomb. So I use methanol to sort of wash it. And then I use sodium borohydride. Nothing happened. No alcohol whatsoever. I wonder why the reaction doesn't work. And at that time, I didn't know that by adding methanol to the selenium dioxide or whatever, then that will form the sort of selenous acid methyl ester. So that's acid, okay? That acid catalyzes the acetal formation. So by washing that reaction vessel with methanol, aldehyde immediately underwent the acetalization to form the dimethyl acetal, and that's the reason why it didn't undergo the reduction to form the alcohol. And for the, again, this reaction also worked very well in the small scale, using orthodichlorobenzene as a solvent, and then heat it to reflux. And very clean-cut elimination of ethanol occurred to form the enol ether. And for the large-scale preparation, I just wanted to see the water come in. So but also I didn't want to spend too much time to dry that orthodichlorobenzene. So I passed that maybe a pint of the orthodichlorobenzene through the active alumina, just to remove the water. But then I didn't realize, here, the reaction was catalyzed by HCl. Very small amount of HCl that was, generated for preparation of orthodichlorobenzene. And that is the one that catalyzes reactions. That's the reason why, of course, aluminum, active aluminum simply also takes care of the not only water, but also HCl2. So there's no acid to catalyze. So then no matter how long I waited, then no elimination of ethanol occurred. So yeah, by doing this kind of thing, I gradually learned chemistry. Another story during tetrodotoxin synthesis. Well, I don't remember what reaction I did. I told Kishi that the reaction didn't work. He got angry and said the reaction should have worked. I wonder why he got so angry, and years later he told me that he couldn't wait, so then he came to the lab on Sunday and did the same experiment and then knew that it works. And then next day, when I show up to the lab, and then he asked me to do the same thing. And then I said, well, it doesn't work. That's the reason why he got so angry. Okay, Dr. Kishi and softball. Because he used to play for the senior high baseball team. So he was very good at the baseball. And he was also good at softball too. You know, he especially his fielding is very good. And also he liked to hit. But as I said, okay, he was too lazy to run and use a DR, okay? Not DH, it's a DR, okay? That means that, you know, just, well, you know that, you know, pinch runner, PR, then they use very often, you know, in occasion. But DR is one that, you know, just immediately after Dr. Kishi hit the ball, then, you know, student has to start running. So, and also he used to say, a poor baseball player does not make a good chemist. How about you, student? And also, as you know, Dr. Kishi has 2 daughters. And then he also used to say that, well, you know, good chemists don't have boys. So then I asked, you know, much later, I told him, well, you know, I know that you wanted to have a boy and wanted to, you know, play baseball with him. And he eventually admitted that, yeah, he wanted to have a boy. This is Pierre. Actually, I was, you know, power hitter when I was young. So I could hit the ball much farther than those Kishi. But as I said, you know, although it was such a harsh life, I never felt like I was forced to work. So the slavery type thing is, I'm jokingly telling you, but then, you know, I have never felt like a slave. You know, I was filled with the excitement, okay, of doing cutting-edge research. So no matter how hard I worked, then I didn't regret. The only kind of things that I really enjoyed was that sleep at home on Sunday till noon. Okay, that's you know, my only pastime when I was young. Okay, well, this is just, it happened in 1972. Totally unexpected news in 1972. Fukuyama-kun, okay, well, kun is the another suffix just to be used for the, you know, maybe junior people, okay? Starting this summer, I'll be a visiting professor at Harvard for a year. Would you like to come with me? He gently asked me, but you know, no chance for me to say no. Yeah, this means I must go with him, okay? But the problem is that I have never left my home till then. So that really worried me. Well, where can I eat something, or where do I wash my clothes and so on? Everything really worried me a little bit. But then, well, eventually, well, I became more interested in just coming to this country. And my days were numbered. Well, you know, just the thing is just back then in 1970s or so, then airplane crashed a little more often than now. Okay, so there's a little chance that this might be my last day, okay? Because from Japan to the United States, it's a long way to go, right? So then you cannot expect, you know, a safe trip, you know, completely safe trip. So, of course, this is my first experience to get on the airplane, and at the naval station, my friends and also the lab mates and also even Professor Goto also came to our platform to see me off. And years later, Dr. Kishi told me that he took me to Harvard so that I could receive a PhD degree from Professor Woodward, because he only spent 1 year and then come back to Japan. And then his plan was to leave myself in Professor Woodward's laboratory. But anyway, in 1972, I came to Harvard with him. And then he told me that let's start total synthesis of such toxin. Okay, that's a toxin, especially just come from the muscle, probably, in California. And it's a red tide toxin. And this is the structure Professor Henry Rappaport proposed in 1971. Even I know that this structure is wrong, okay, as a graduate student. But because this kind of strange structure, you cannot imagine that could easily exist. And this is the correct structure reported in 1975. So 4 years later. So in 1972, Dr. Kishi told me, just let's start the total synthesis of saxitoxin. Structure of that, I don't remember. I don't have the lab notebook, so I don't remember the structure. But then, fortunately, this was not identical to that. So it's completely different structure he presented. But then, I remember that the starting material was this guanine. This is just a rock. It doesn't dissolve in organic solvent. Like for example, in DMSO, 1 milliliter of DMSO can hold 0.1 milligram of this compound. So I couldn't do anything, almost anything. And then so I just kept complaining to Dr. Kishi, well, I don't want to do this because I can't do much at all. So every day I try to use a hot DMSO to dissolve a little bit of this compound and then do alkylation and so on and so forth. It didn't work. But fortunately, after a while, Nakatsuka-san, 2 years senior to me, Dr. Kishi got some money from Homan Roche, so then he could invite another student, and he was involved in the total synthesis of sporidesmin A, but the progress was so slow, so Dr. Kishi was frustrated, so decided just to call him to Cambridge. The reason why he has some problem is that this portion here, it has to be NH here to form the carbon-nitrogen bond right here. But this type of compound with protecting group on nitrogen, and that could be easily removed without touching this structure. That was so difficult. And one example I did in the Conant laboratory, the first floor of Conant, okay? Put this compound and anisaldehyd and trifluoroacetic acid in a steel bomb, and then place it in a dry as acetone bath, okay? And then you condense the hydrogen sulfide using that dry as acetone bath. The boiling point of hydrogen sulfide is minus 60 degrees. So you can use dry as acetone to condense hydrogen sulfide. But I didn't want to knock down that hydrogen sulfide because it might kill me, right? So I have to use my bare hand, okay? Minus 60 degrees or whatever, and then quickly pour the hydrogen sulfide in a hood like that, okay? And then put the lid, tighten up, and then heat that one to 100 degrees. And then you can get this compound. But the yield is less than 30%. And but then, I don't know, I wonder how many of you could detect this subtle change, okay? Stu also said that TLC. I co-spotted the reaction mixture, with this compound. I co-spotted, and then, so 3 spots. Reaction mixture, co-spotted, and then reference compound. And then I saw this very subtle change of the slight increase of this compound. So realized, okay, something happened when I co-spotted this reaction mixture. And the crystals I could obtain is this trithione. So I decided to use other acid to do this reaction. So using HCl methanol to remove this acetyl group. So it's a mercaptan compound, SH compound. 135 trithione, BS3 ethylate, methylene chloride reflux. Sure enough, in 80%, we could get this compound. And then you can easily remove that methoxymethyl group without touching this structure. So that's the reason why Mr. Nakatsuka back then could synthesize the sporidesmin 8. And immediately after that, Dr. Kishi asked me to complete the dehydroxytoxin synthesis, and that I could do before going back to Japan in 1973. In 1974, we came back to Harvard again, and then Dr. Kishi asked me to work on the octahydrohistiotoxin, that's a frog poison. So I came up with the scalable route to the final compound. But to tell you the truth, I really I haven't made it public that much. That is to say, after publishing this work, Kishi asked me to make more the compound. And so I ran out of the diol. So then bought a brand new diol, and then used the pentenyl lithium, and to tell the reaction didn't work. So I didn't report to Dr. Kishi. I just simply put them in the under the rug, and say goodbye to this project. The thing is that apparently the fresh diol could reduce this compound so quickly. So then that's the reason why the reaction didn't work. So then use diol, pretty old diol, this reaction works. So then if you do it once again, then I'm sure you can find the optimum conditions, but I didn't have time to do that. Okay, now, I was a utility student, okay? It's good to be a utility player for baseball, okay? Well, maybe from the professor side, it's nice to have a utility student. So my name was here and there, so after publishing 12 papers carrying my name, and then Dr. Kishi finally told me, oh, okay, now you can now start your PhD work. And he said, since you'll be our first PhD, you must complete the total synthesis of glycogen. And Professor Woodward's group, 2 students, tried to synthesize this compound and didn't work. And then back then, as I told you, I was very efficient chemist. So then Dr. Kishi asked me to do maybe almost twice as many experiments as the ordinary student. And well, if I continue to do the work like this, then I will become just only a high-end technician. So then I told Dr. Kishi, don't tell me anything. I'll make this compound without your idea. Okay? So I started working on that one. And okay, starting from this, and then I actually made this compound and waited until carbon-nitrogen bond is formed. But then what happened was just only a phenol could be obtained in ice shift. But I'm sure it's a reason why it didn't give a CN bond-forming reaction is that this is bicycle 3 to 2 system. So then this one is just like for the pyridine dione phase, it's equatorial. So then you can't form a good overlap with this pi bond and this nitrogen lone pair. That's probably the reason why the reaction didn't work. And then I came up with another idea. Okay, just carry out the microreaction to here using triton B. The first reaction was done in methylene chloride. That gave the 1:3 ratio. And I was actually, Dr. Kishi later told me that, you're too sloppy. Yes, I was sloppy, but then there was some reason why I was so sloppy. These two compounds, RF, are so different. And then the top compound, okay, the top compounds, RF, was same as the addition product of methylene. So I didn't check the NMR of this compound. I just simply used this compound, and then in a month, I came up with this compound, not this compound, this compound. That's AP glyotoxin. So the structure was not identical to the natural glyotoxin. Wow, I was so disappointed. And then this is the only time Dr. Kishi told me something. That, did you scrutinize the reaction mixture? Then I said, wow, I was so quick to just go forward. And so I simply assumed that the compound was this, but it wasn't. And later, using DMSO, we could get the 66% desired compound, 32% undesired compound. And sure us that led to the formation of glyotoxin. Then, to our PhD oral exam. Yeah, I was standing cold in front of Dr. Kishi's office door for 20 minutes, more than 20 minutes. They all went into the Professor Kishi's office. So I was wondering, what's going on, because I was not introduced into the Dr. Kishi's office. And then eventually, Dr. Kishi came out, and then I could get in his office. And then the first thing that happened was that Professor Woodward stood up and then approached me, and then shook my hand, saying, "Congratulations, Dr. Fukuyama." Well, I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. Now, now fine. And then started Professor Woodward was really interested in my work, and so he kept asking me questions. So I had to go to the blackboard and show my opinion, and then Professor Woodward went to the blackboard, and then so that really on and on went, just continued for 2 hours. But finally, I could get the PhD. And then one day after the PhD oral, I was called into Dr. Kishi's office. And he told me that the total synthesis of minomycin C is not progressing very well. So I want you to finish it. Just fill this bottle, okay? Fill this bottle with the important intermediate here, starting from 2,6-dimethyltoluene. It's 11 steps. So starting from 500 grams of 2,6-dimethyltoluene, And then just return to Japan for your wedding. And this project, Margaret, 3 postdocs are actively working very hard on it. And then, but Dr. Kishi wanted me to simply finish it. So it was a hard project. I was not like, they didn't like me at all. I mean, 3 postdocs, I knew it, but then since Dr. Kishi wanted me to finish it, so I worked like hell, okay, for 3 weeks without sleeping too much. Yeah, just to be in time to go back to Japan to marry Yuri. Is she sleeping? No. The last stage of mathematical synthesis. Dr. Kishi brought the Mike Young paper saying that, okay, well, for the heater and so on, then using triphenyl carbenium tetraborate, you can abstract hydride and then activate that kind of a star. So he ordered this chemical, and then I used this one for just a milligram scale experiment. The reaction worked, but this kind of sensitive reaction, this shouldn't work because this is a so moisture-sensitive compound. So I used instead the fluoroboric acid, showing us that the reaction works just like this expensive reagent. And so it worked, and then converting this alcohol to the carbamate, and then hydrolyze the acetate, and then pitznamorphate oxidation from the aldehyde. And then here, using perchloric acid and dimethylamine, that's a strong acid-weak base combination. So protronation here, and then somehow enolization, and then retromicro reaction to form the NH compound. So that way we could synthesize the mitomycin A, and of course, by treatment with ammonia, you can easily get the mitomycin C. And then after completing that mitomycin C, Dr. Kishi asked me to do completely secret project. No writing of the structure in the notebook, I mean lab notebook, no writing on the wire, no structure, anything. That he just was curious that this kind of color center would cause the spiral formation, and so then that could induce the asymmetric epoxidation. And so I use the acetate and also OH compound, but at most it's only a few percent EE. So I insisted that I don't want to do this reaction anymore. This is not interesting at all. So I just simply said, I don't want to do that. And then Dr. Kishi was very reluctant to abandon this project. But then he said, if you don't like it so much, let's try the total synthesis of monation after solving the following problem. And Dr. Nakata was involved in the total synthesis of lactose A. And he used a Shapless epoxidation to control the stereochemistry of this tetrahydrofuran. Up, down, down. But then for the monation, it has the down, down, down system. And Dr. Kishi didn't have the idea to control the stereochemistry this way. So I was using that, then, just the Feezer's, big plastic model, and just move around and say what can be done with this compound, and then realize that by holding this ketones oxygen and epoxide oxygen somehow, okay, then the top compound, your phase, okay, beta phase will be more crowded. So then the reduction should occur from the bottom phase, that's the alpha side. So this might be a major product for the reduction. And sodium borohydride and the borane didn't do a job. It's only a one-to-one mixture resulted. But then by using the lithium plus as a counter ion, especially using this kind of bulky reducing agent, then we could get the about 6-to-1 ratio of a desired compound and undesired compound. So we decided to start working on the monensin. So this is just, in my side, it's a cheating synthesis. Okay, it's not total synthesis because total synthesis you need to have more compound. So Dr. Kishi obtained the good amount of monensin from Eli Lilly. They feed this monensin to cow. Okay, so they have a good amount of monensin, and by using chromium trioxide oxidation, you can get two different types of lactone, okay, monocyclic one and also this tetracyclic one. So we got 10 grams of this compound, and then actually racemic compound. I synthesize this compound as a racemate. And then I converted this compound to GS, and of course this one is optically pure, so we got the optically pure compound. And this side, because Scott also mentioned that, yes, the Gerald Schmidt from ETH, he already synthesized this portion. So I borrowed a few hundred milligrams of intermediate from him, and then I also built this portion. So now what we have to do is to couple this aldehyde with this ketone. So first, I use LDA and then followed by the addition of zinc chloride from the zinc inorate. And then I added the aldehyde, and no aldehyde reaction occurred at all. Maybe the scale was too small or whatever. But then I realized that, okay, this aldehyde, this proton is pretty crowded. And this is methyl ketone. So then I thought that if you mix these two compounds and then use base, kinetic deprotonation should occur on the methyl side, not the this crowded side. And sure enough, that well, this could be the first example of using that not LDA, it's a MDA. Okay, using just first make the S-magnesium bromide from S-bromide and magnesium, and then add diisopropamine. Simply cook it for a while, and then use that one to a mixture of this aldehyde and ketone. Sure, that at room temperature, it gave a 1-to-1 mixture of diastereomers here, so carbon-carbon bond formation occurred. And then later, my former colleague found that by cooling to minus 70 degrees, ratio became 8-to-1 in favor of the compound. But anyway, here, hydrogenolysis, and then using camphor acid to form the ketal with these two alcohols and ketone. Okay, this portion. And then after that, the hydrolysis of this methyl ester to form the acid salt. But my biggest surprise is that this acid salt, it comes out on the signature TLC. It's very non-polar. That's my surprise. And after that, well, actually, when I got my PhD, then Dr. Goto asked me to come back to Japan to become an assistant professor. But I breathed the free air for such a long time. So then, well, I didn't want to go back to Japan. I don't know how many years I have to be the assistant professor because it's a system is completely different, right? So then. And then Dr. Kishi immediately told me that, well, why don't you find a job in this country? And then fortunately enough that I could find a job at Rice University, a small but pretty cozy place. And actually, Dr. Kishi was actually pleased. I'm sure he was kind of pleased that to find that his student, Japanese student, could actually remain in this country. And so, anyways, this was the last day at Harvard, myself, and then Yuri there. And so, you understand that, okay? It's a completely different time. And of course, you might know kind of, sort of a transition, okay, of really hard-working, just only work. But then maybe Dr. Kishi developed whatever the philosophy at Harvard. At Nagano University, only the hard-working would do the job, okay? But then in order to make smart students work, then you need a philosophy to do that. And Dr. Kishi never praised me. Never praised me, okay? In front of the public. Up until that April of 2009, almost 16 years ago, I was invited to give a Max Tischer Prize lecture. And that was the time I was totally surprised that, just he praised my work and so on and so forth in front of students. And wow, But I knew he spoke highly of me when I was undergraduate. Because I kept, just borrowing chemicals from Professor Hirata's group. And Professor Yamada told me that, okay, Dr. Kishi was speaking very highly of you. But Dr. Kishi never showed that kind of thing at all to me. And second and the last comment by Dr. Kishi, okay, that's kind of including the retirement commemorative booklet of Professor Fukuyama. The vast amount of research achievements encompassed in your research on the total synthesis of nitrogen-containing natural products can only be described as amazing. Well, he could use that kind of word, okay? Well, and then I see an extraordinary imagination, creativity, and artistic beauty in your work. So that's, I think, just really utmost praise, and I really cherish that kind of words, Dr. Kishi expressed. Okay, this is the last slide, okay? Without Dr. Kishi, there is no Fukuyama. There is no question about it, okay? And then I appreciate his influence and whatever, everything, from the bottom of my heart. And I'm so much grateful to Dr. Kishi for guiding me into the wonderful world of organic chemistry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, as Dan mentioned at the beginning, I've been asked to read the memorial minute that was composed by Stuart Schreiber, E.J. Corey, and myself, and that I had the honor to read at a general meeting of the Harvard faculty in April of last year. Yoshito Kishi was born April 13th, 1937 in Nagoya, Japan, and died January 9th, 2023 in Massachusetts. He was a renowned chemist whose scientific contributions to organic chemistry were among the most impactful in the history of the field. He was a crown jewel and guiding force in the Harvard Chemistry Department for 50 years. Those of us who had the great fortune to have him as a colleague know well that he would have denied what I have just said, as an essential part of the magic was his humble nature and genuine modesty. Kishi was one of the greatest synthetic organic chemists of his time, and indeed of any time. His most conspicuous research achievement was the total synthesis of a highly toxic marine natural product called palytoxin. The isolation of palytoxin from natural sources was first reported in 1971, and it remains one of the largest and most formidably complex organic molecules ever identified. Kishi's was the first, and to date, still the only, laboratory to synthesize the molecule. His synthesis of palytoxin in 1994 was years ahead of its time, and it is noted in nearly every organic chemistry textbook as the pinnacle of achievement, the Mount Everest of the field. The field of organic synthesis is concerned with synthesizing organic molecules of interest, and Kishi had few peers in that arena. In addition to palytoxin, his lab synthesized an astonishing array of complex natural products with names and structures known to every serious practitioner of the field. Compounds such as monensin, tetrodotoxin, and hylochondrin B, among many others.
But the field of synthesis also encompasses discoveries of new reactions, elucidations of new strategic concepts for accessing desired molecular architectures, and, in the best of cases, applications to benefit humanity. An ambitious researcher in the field might aspire to make meaningful advances in one or two of these aspects. Kishi made monumental contributions in all of them. His discovery of a cooperative effect between nickel and chromium enabled an extraordinarily powerful new method to stitch carbons together, giving rise to a class of reactions now known as the Nozaki-Hiyama-Kishi reactions. This method was ultimately applied by Kishi and many others in key steps of numerous total syntheses. Kishi created the concept of acyclic stereocontrol, where the conformational preferences of highly flexible organic molecules could be exploited predictably for the first time to build more complex structures in precise ways. The power of acyclic stereocontrol laid the foundation for Kishi's synthesis of many natural products, and it is no exaggeration to say that it revolutionized the way people thought about organic synthesis. In collaborative efforts, Kishi studied the biological activity of his synthetic targets to great avail. Drawing from his work on the marine natural product and potent anti-cancer agent, halicondrin B, he and his collaborators at Eisai conceived of and synthesized a substantially simpler unnatural molecule that would come to be known as eribulin. That compound is by far the most complex fully synthetic molecule to receive FDA approval. It is a prescribed treatment for metastatic breast cancer, and its impact on Taxol-resistant cancers is substantial. Its discovery and development relied directly on Kishi's advances in organic synthesis, especially his diastereoselective chromium and nickel co-catalyzed coupling reactions and his concept of acyclic stereocontrol. Kishi taught us the importance of fearlessness and of taking one's own unique path, regardless of what the scientific community might expect. As a colleague, Yoshi was a humble and soft-spoken leader who inspired faculty and students far more through his example than through his words. He was universally admired and trusted as a colleague of excellent judgment and complete integrity. His work ethic was legendary, as was his unwavering commitment to originality and scientific rigor. Where different leading organic chemistry labs would race to be the first to synthesize a newly discovered natural product, Kishi would wait before even thinking about synthesizing it. As he told me once, if it is easy, someone else can do it. But if no one has succeeded after 5 years, then maybe it's interesting. Along with their educational and research missions, academic departments have no issue more important than the recruitment of new faculty. Yoshi would always ask, is the person we are considering someone who will see things that escape others and who will tackle them regardless of their apparent feasibility? Yoshi's voice is still heard in our minds, questioning the significance of new avenues of research and the fortitude of efforts to travel down these avenues. Yoshi Kishi was a primary force in ushering in the modern era of synthetic organic chemistry. His pioneering work resulted in a new appreciation of the reach and power of that field that will be felt for generations to come. Kishi was arguably the most famous, most successful synthetic organic chemist in the history of the field.
Professor Kishi had a profound influence on the art and science of organic synthesis. His group tackled natural products of astonishing complexity, molecules that challenged really what chemists thought was possible at the time.
Kishi once told me that he never published a total synthesis in his group if it had already been published before.
He would wait several years to see if anybody else could synthesize them. If it was easy to do, he wasn't interested in doing it. Kishi came up essentially with a concept that we now call acyclic stereocontrol. And that created the field and really revolutionized the way he and everyone else did organic synthesis.
In the history of organic chemistry, Professor Kishi will be remembered as someone who discovered a reaction methodology and then used that methodology to discover, develop, and manufacture a medicine. I know of no other scientist that can make that claim, and thus Professor Kishi stands alone in that regard.
Another remarkable contribution was the development of nickel-chromium co-catalysis in the Nozaki-Hiyama-Kishi reactions, which have evolved into staple methods for the preparation of carbon-carbon bonds.
Kishi was an extraordinary mentor. He certainly led through example, through his high standards, and so many of them went on to have absolutely extraordinary careers.
I asked Professor Kishi how he garnered the respect and confidence of his group early in his academic career. On Sundays, the quote, day off, he said that he would come into the lab very early and run all sorts of crazy TLC experiments. And then Monday morning, he would have informed suggestions for members of the group. And that type of leadership by example is something that he exhibited not just in academia, but also at ASI. Kishi exhibited tremendous discipline and patience in how he managed activities in his group.
If the relationship between advisor and student is successful, the student surpasses the advisor. It's both this patience and then this ability to acknowledge that you've been surpassed, that the student knows more about the project than you do, and then it's time for them to leave because now they have the ability to lead.
If there's one thing that I am grateful to Professor Kishi for, it's really that he raised my ambition about what we could do as scientists and made me want to pursue things that looked impossible at the start.
He chose problems that were, at first glance, ridiculous, like making paleotoxin or doing a drug discovery program based on helicodrins, but he always succeeded because of his perception of practical approaches to solve problems, to break them down into manageable components, and then to recruit people to work on those problems that shared his same fearlessness to attack those seemingly impossible hurdles.
Graduate education is at the core of everything we do in CCB. The research that we engage in, it's a platform for the training of the next generation of academics, industrial leaders, policymakers, journalists, just a broad and well-equipped workforce that will contribute to solving the most pressing problems facing society today. It's a real privilege to work in the same labs where Professor Kishi made many of these groundbreaking discoveries. The legacy of that space is a motivation to our group, it's an inspiration, and it's also a challenge to uphold the very highest standards of scientific rigor and creativity.
All the concerns and fears and real obstacle to secure funding to do the research that we want to do. It's had a really distracting and damaging effect on the graduate student experience.
By definition, basic science research is rarely profitable in the short run, but the training of people who can think deeply and tackle very difficult problems, that's critical, and I think one of the smartest investments that our nation can make.
I promise that we continue to attract the best students in the world to Harvard, and then providing them with a mentorship to do their best work. And the support from alumni and donors is going to be an essential part of that.
I think if we honor Yoshi's vision, it would be to make possible that kind of environment to persist.
If there is any credit given, all these credit to go to very creative, imaginative, committed, hardworking colleagues in our group, and that go to this. And thank you so much for your attention.